Military leaders of 3 West African countries, Burkina Faso, Mali and Niger, have signed a mutual defense pact. The Liptako-Gourma Charter establishes the Alliance of Sahel States. The pact is aimed at, or is named after the region where the 3 countries' borders meet. We speak to Advocate Sipho Mantula, an Africa analyst, on the significance of this pact. Thank you very much for your time this morning, Advocate. So let's start with that, essentially, why this is important, if at all.
Jumbo Africa says Dudu, and to your viewers. I think if we look back, this Alliance of the Sahel, it doesn't begin now. Remember 7 years ago, they used to be called the G5 of the Sahel, including Chad. And now when you look at the significance now, we know that at the backdrop of Niger's military coup in July, as well as in 2021 of Mali, and even in Ouagadougou in 2022, we saw how the removal of the civilian heads of state by the military has caused this tension. But also in the back of what's happening in Niger, that was one of the key issues that ECOWAS, how it has been treating the Sahel region. It has pushed them to sign this military agreement and a pact for 2 or 3 reasons. The first being to say, if there is an attack against our neighbor, we will stand for that. And secondly, you might look at it's for sharing of military knowledge, intelligence, and as well as the third one being the supply of food within these borders. Because when we talk of security, we will tend to forget that there is food security also. That becomes another element whenever there are military coups in the Sahel region.
You speak of food insecurity because of the sanctions imposed by ECOWAS. It's quite difficult for supplies to go from Nigeria into Niger more specifically. But when we take a look at overall the refusal, I guess, to associate with the West, if you will, or some countries in the West, what should this tell us about the pact?
No, correctly. Actually, I earlier wanted on my point of introduction mention the part of the Franco-Africo, what we know as the hegemony of the French in the Sahel states, and how now we are seeing the anti-French sentiments. You'll understand that even in Niger, they've been pushing, trying to push the France ambassador to leave Niamey. So the issue of French anti-sentiment also is pushing these military leaders to rethink their military deals, their military pacts. And also you'll recall, Dudu, just recently you had the UN General Assembly where one of the generals from Guinea-Conakry justifying this military coups in the African continent and also raising how the West tried to unmask, how the West trying to define and even depict the African democracy. And that's where we see that these military agreements also go into political governance. It will be good that this military pacts also do translate into the military and civilian relations, because this is what we've been lacking in the African continent. And secondly, beyond the military-civilian rule, you need to now link what I said, the deficit of democratization of Africa, or what we call African values of democracy. How do we redefine the values of democracy in Africa and avoid what we see as if the military now try to usurp the powers of the people through their ballot and using their bullet to take power? And that's why I think we are still struggling to can have that synergy, that harmonization of the military and civilian rule, as well as what I'll call the military democracy and the civilian democracy.
Advocate Mantula, why is it that we see the bullet replacing so-called democracy in some parts of the continent, right? Because you also see, for instance, in these countries, when you speak of Mali, you speak of Burkina Faso, you speak of Niger, ordinary citizens of those countries actually took to the streets and they were celebrating that anything is better than what we have been going through for the past couple of years. We saw some leaders also making some changes to their military structures. But why is it that we are seeing the bullet and some sectors of society in these countries actually supporting that move?
No, it is said, actually. You'll recall also, we might have forgotten Gabon, how Gabon went through elections. And within 48 hours, we see one of the cousins taking power again through the military force. I think, again, what you are raising in terms of the civilians also being caught up off guard, whether are they for a democratization of their country, are they willing to have the members of parliament and executive being accountable, or are they following the military orders, instruction? I think that's where we are a bit struggling. And also we see the sentiments moving from France to Russia and China. Again, another calculable mistake that I see from our communities, because for us to practice African democracy, we should have representatives that emerges from our own communities, that will deal with the challenges of our own communities, because within this military arrangement that we have seen also is the looting of the natural resources of these countries. But also they come under the pretext and pretending that, yes, we want to correct our former relations with our former colonizers. But the first thing that we have to do is our mineral rights, it is our natural resources. And I think that's where the communities are being left off. Now, that's where the issues of economic interest creeps in. And we lack now, how do we restore the people's democratic processes? And that's why I think also when you look at the French colonies, democracy was never a thing that happens in the south or in the east. One will assume that it is the nature of the colonizer and the colonized. How do they relate in terms of governance? And that also defeats this purpose of what is this independence Africa. Ali Mazrui, a Kenyan scholar, when I was speaking to one of my elders this morning, we were saying the independence of Africa actually, it is by cohesion and by consent. It seems that we are not moving away from liberation of us being independencies. It's like we are in a liberation of a velvet glove. We are being treated by our colonizer in a sense that we are just like minors. And that's where I think the deficit of democracy becomes apparent and becomes clearer to our people. And I think it is high time that in Africa we need to own our own democratic processes and not allow the former colonizers to once again re-emerge and want to redefine what is democracy to us.
How long will that song be sung, Advocate Mantula? Because also, what role do leaders on this here continent have to play in not beckoning former colonizers or beckoning the world systems to change, because that has been happening for eons, and it is what it is, I guess, essentially. But for this here particular continent and her people who have not, some of them, enjoyed the fruits of what is in the belly of this continent, essentially, what there needs to be done? Is it a different kind of leadership? Is it a new generation of Africans who are pressed to a point where you demand better for yourselves? And what does that better look like? How do you achieve that better?
No, definitely. But so long as you say, how long will it take? So long as we have our leaders becoming servant leaders, becoming ethical leaders, and also the issue that I've been thinking for some time, the issue of the succession of leadership in Africa. It seems that we are a bit struggling. And as earlier you were saying, the military arrangements in the presidency, what I will always say, in the name of the father, the son, and the cousin, and the father-in-law, we are now moving towards that issue of power mongering, greediness. But as you said, the new generation of leaders will have to be a new type of leaders who are clear about the African agenda. They understand the Africa we want. And I think also our former presidents and former leaders also, they're not doing enough. You might be having institutions named after them, but I don't think they are doing enough also, because they have been also been drained by the West in terms of models of leadership. So it is important also for the African continent and for the current crisis that we are having, of where we are having this military coup. And also, again, to share with your viewers, this military coup also started in the 60s. So it is another re-emergence of this power mongering and power grabbing. But at the same time, forgetting that you need to have that relation, as I said earlier, of the military and the civilians, and practice African democracy, or what we will call Ubuntu-cracy, or what we will call Untu-cracy, which is the government that is within the people, driven by the people. Like Professor Mokgobe Ramose will always say that. But this democracy we are in, Sipho, it is a fake one. There are fault lines. The same like constitutions do of many African countries. We see this power grabbing also becoming with the term limits. We see it also coming up with, constitutional disobedience. We see members of parliament becoming greedy, not sacrificing.
Advocate Mantula, thank you very much for your contribution this morning. Advocate Sipho Mantula is an Africa analyst.